A 7-year-old girl who has never spoken a single word in her life opened her mouth in a crowded hotel hallway. And the only word she said was "Dad," to a man she had never met before. Not to her mother, not to any of the doctors who had spent years trying to reach her. To a stranger in a maintenance uniform, kneeling on a cold marble floor at midnight. And in that one impossible moment, 3 lives cracked open in ways none of them would ever fully recover from. If a story like this moves you, the kind that reminds you what human beings are actually capable of, please subscribe to this channel and hit the like button right now. We tell stories here that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one is going to take everything you've got. The Whitmore Group's annual Christmas Investment Gala was the kind of event that required 3 months of planning, 2 separate security firms, and a guest list that read like a directory of American financial power. The Grand Alderton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan had been booked exclusively for the evening, all 42 floors, every ballroom, every terrace, and by 8 o'clock on December 22nd, the lobby alone held more combined net worth than some small nations. Sabrina Whitmore stood near the center of the main ballroom's raised platform and looked out over 400 people who needed something from her. They always needed something. Favorable terms on a co-investment, a private word about a pending acquisition, an introduction to someone she knew and they didn't. She had learned years ago that the smile she wore at these events was not really a smile at all. It was a signal, precise and deliberate, the way a traffic light is a signal. Green, you may approach. Yellow, tread carefully. Red, don't. She was 30 years old and had been running the Whitmore Group independently for 4 years since her father's stroke had left him unable to hold a pen. The company managed $14 billion in active capital across real estate, technology infrastructure, and private equity. She had restructured 3 failing portfolio companies in the past 18 months. 2 financial magazines had run cover stories on her in the same year, which had never happened to anyone under 35. Her assistant kept a folder of interview requests she didn't have time to answer. None of it had made her a warmer person, she knew that. The people closest to her, which was a very short list, had stopped expecting it. Her dress was midnight blue, structured at the shoulder, and had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pinned up in a way that said composed, not elegant, because composed was the signal she needed to send tonight. The quarterly report had been quietly catastrophic, not publicly. She had managed the messaging carefully, but the board knew, and several of the investors in this room knew, and the evening was as much about damage control as it was about celebration. She was in the middle of a conversation with a hedge fund partner named Marvin Chu when she realized she could not see Ava. The thought arrived not as panic, but as a cold, clear fact, the way important facts sometimes did. She turned her head. The small table near the east wall where she had set up Ava's tablet and noise-canceling headphones was empty. The headphones were still there. The tablet was dark. "Excuse me," she said to Marvin Chu, not waiting for him to finish his sentence. She moved through the ballroom with the same controlled efficiency she applied to everything, but her eyes were scanning with an urgency her expression refused to show. Ava was 7 years old, profoundly deaf since birth, and had never, not once, not even close, spoken a word. She communicated through gesture, through expression, through a complex visual language she had developed with her therapists over years of painstaking work. She was not, by any clinical definition, mute. The doctors were careful about that distinction. Her vocal anatomy was intact. The pathways existed, but something had kept the door shut since the day she was born, and no one, not the specialists in Boston, not the team in London, not the woman who had given birth to her, had found a key. Sabrina stepped out of the ballroom into the wide carpeted corridor and looked both ways. The hallway was quieter here, lit in warm amber, the noise of the gala muffled behind the double doors. A server moved past with a tray of empty glasses. A hotel staffer talked quietly into a radio at the far end of the hall. No Ava. Sabrina walked faster. The east wing corridor branched toward the service elevator bank, and she turned that direction because Ava was drawn to quiet spaces, always had been. And the maintenance side of the hotel would be quieter than anywhere else on this floor. It was a guess, but it was an informed guess. 7 years of trying to understand a child she sometimes felt she barely knew. She heard the voice before she turned the corner. Not Ava's voice. A man's voice, low and unhurried, with a specific kind of steadiness in it that Sabrina recognized without being able to name, like a hand pressed flat against a vibrating surface, calming it. She turned the corner. The man was kneeling on the floor of the service corridor, down on one knee, his weight settled back on his heel in the way someone kneels when they are not planning to stand up quickly. He was wearing the Alderton's maintenance uniform, dark gray with a name patch on the chest she couldn't read from this distance. He looked to be in his mid to late 30s, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped hair and the kind of face that had been through some weather. Not handsome in any magazine sense, just present, solid. Ava was sitting cross-legged on the floor 2 feet in front of him. She was looking directly into his face. Sabrina stopped walking. The man was not touching Ava. He was not reaching for her. I was not doing the thing that strangers always did with deaf children, which was speak too slowly and too loudly and too close, as if volume could substitute for comprehension. He was simply there, in her space, steady and still, and his hands were resting open on his knees in a posture that Sabrina would later spend a long time thinking about, palms up, fingers loose, a posture that communicated the exact opposite of threat. He was talking, not in the careful, over-enunciated way of someone performing patience, just talking, the way you talk to someone you aren't trying to impress. Sabrina caught fragments as she drew closer. Found it right here, actually, this same corner. Hotel's got good hiding spots, I'll give it that. Ava was watching his face with the total absorption that Sabrina had only ever seen her give to a handful of things. The tablet, the small plush rabbit she had slept with since she was 2. And now this stranger's face. Sabrina took another step forward, and the man's eyes came up immediately. Not startled, just aware. He had known she was there before she spoke. She would notice that later. "She's mine," Sabrina said, and heard how it sounded and didn't care. "She's my daughter." The man nodded slowly. "She wandered in from the gala side about 10 minutes ago. I didn't want to move her too fast. She seemed like she needed a minute." "She's deaf," Sabrina said, already moving toward Ava. "She can't—" "I know," the man said. "She's been watching my mouth. I've been keeping it visible." Sabrina stopped again, looked at him. He had noticed that Ava was reading his lips and had adjusted his behavior accordingly. In 10 minutes, without being told, she crouched down in front of Ava and touched her daughter's arm, and Ava looked at her. The familiar, careful look, the one that was not unfriendly but was not warm either, the one Sabrina had been unable to decode for 7 years, despite every book and every specialist and every carefully curated therapy session. The look that said, "I see you, I'm not sure you see me." Sabrina signed quickly. "Are you okay? You scared me." Ava looked at her. Then she looked back at the man. And then something happened that would divide Sabrina's life into before and after as cleanly as a blade. Ava opened her mouth. Her small face tightened with effort, the way it did when she was trying to work out a puzzle. And then, in a voice that was rough and unpracticed and small, in the way a new thing is always small, she said a single word. "Dad?" She was not looking at Sabrina. She was looking at the man in the maintenance uniform. The word hung in the corridor. Sabrina felt it move through her like a current. She had imagined, in the sleepless way of parents who love imperfectly and desperately, what it would be like to hear her daughter's voice for the first time. She had imagined it in hospital rooms and taxi back seats and the dark of her own bedroom at 3 in the morning. She had imagined it aimed at her. The man's expression did something complicated and then settled. He looked at the child's face for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was completely steady, which Sabrina would find herself unable to understand for weeks. "Hey," he said, soft and direct. "Hey, I'm right here." Ava's face opened. That was the only word for it, like something that had been closed for a very long time. His name was Logan Pierce. Sabrina found this out 40 minutes later in the hotel manager's office, where they had all ended up after a security guard radioed in a report of a minor found in the service corridor, and the entire east wing of the gala staff had quietly panicked. He sat in a chair on the opposite side of the manager's desk, still in his uniform, and answered questions with the minimum number of words required to be polite. He was not cold about it. He just didn't appear to feel any need to fill silence. Age 37. Employed by the Alderton for 14 months, overnight maintenance supervisor. Previous employment, And here he paused briefly, not in a nervous way, just a considering way. Various. No family in the city. A son, 6 years old, named Marcus, currently staying with a neighbor in Queens who watched him on Logan's overnight shifts. Sabrina watched him from across the room, where she was standing with Ava pressed against her side. Ava had not looked away from Logan since they walked in. The hotel manager, a tightly wound man named Devaney, was apologizing for the fourth time about a child accessing a non-public area, and Sabrina cut him off. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "Ava moves quickly when she wants to." She looked at Logan again. He was not fidgeting. Most people fidgeted when being scrutinized by someone like Sabrina Whitmore in a high-pressure room. He was just sitting, forearms resting on his knees, patient the way a large and capable animal is patient, not because it lacks energy, but because it chooses where to put it. "Mr. Pierce," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you." A small thing happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "She was fine," he said. "She just needed somewhere quiet. She's never spoken before," Sabrina said. She hadn't planned to say it in a room full of hotel staff, but it came out anyway because she had not slept properly in 7 years, and she was standing inside the most disorienting 10 minutes of her life, and some things just came out. Not one word, not once. Logan looked at Ava. Ava was still looking at him, and Sabrina watched something pass between them. A kind of recognition she had no language for, a shorthand that had not existed an hour ago, and now clearly did. "She's got a lot to say," Logan said quietly. "She just needed to know it was safe." Sabrina said nothing. She was not used to having nothing to say. The gala was still running one floor above them. She could feel the weight of it, all 400 people and all their requirements. The presentation she still hadn't given, the board members whose confidence she still needed to repair. She had a company to protect. She had been protecting it for 4 years with both hands. Devaney said something about returning to the event. Someone handed Sabrina her phone. There were 17 new messages. She looked at Ava. Ava had taken 3 small steps toward Logan and was standing close enough to him that their shoulders were almost level, despite the height difference, because he was still sitting and she was still standing, and neither of them had moved away. Sabrina made a decision she did not fully understand. "I'll be back," she told Devaney. "Keep him here." She went back to the gala. She shook hands and made the presentation and said the correct words to the correct people. She did it competently and on autopilot, the way you do things when your body is in one room and your mind is in another. What she kept returning to, in the spaces between sentences, was the sound of her daughter's voice, 7 years of silence, and then a single word aimed at a stranger in a gray uniform on a cold marble floor. Dad. Not mom, not help, not her name. Dad. Sabrina had been many things in her life, driven, precise, occasionally ruthless in the ways that her industry required. She had built something real from the ruins of her father's failing company, and she had not been gentle about it, and she had not apologized for not being gentle. She had never quite figured out how to be a mother. She had tried. She was trying. She hired the best people and purchased the best equipment and read the literature and attended the appointments. She loved her daughter with a fierceness that frightened her sometimes. But love and connection were not the same thing, and the gap between them, 7 years of it, had calcified into something she didn't know how to name. She finished her presentation. The room applauded. Someone touched her elbow and said "excellent" as she stepped off the platform. She nodded and walked back toward the elevator. She was halfway across the lobby when her phone buzzed with a message from her head of security. One word, which was how he communicated when things were urgent. Problem. She stopped walking, pulled up his follow-up message, which had come 30 seconds later. Board. Gala finances. Missing documentation. Someone moved the escrow verification files. This is not an accident. Sabrina read the message twice. Then she put the phone in her bag and kept walking toward the elevator because she was very good at not letting what she was feeling show on her face. And because whatever was happening in that ballroom, whatever someone had just set in motion, she needed to understand it before she reacted. But underneath the composure, something cold had settled in her chest. She had spent 4 years building something that people wanted to take from her. Tonight, it seemed, someone had decided to stop waiting. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. Above her, the gala continued. Below her, in a manager's office on the lobby level, her daughter sat close to a stranger she had chosen, for reasons no one could yet explain, to trust completely. Sabrina pressed the button for the lobby floor. The doors closed. The elevator descended. Somewhere in the hotel, a timer was already running. The message from her security chief was 3 words longer in the follow-up, and each additional word made the picture worse. Sabrina read it standing in the elevator, the doors already open on the lobby level, her reflection fractured in the polished brass panel beside her. Escrow verification pulled from server at 9:47 p.m. Access log shows your credentials. Board Chairman Harlan Voss was first person notified. He's already talking to 2 board members in the East Lounge. She did not move for 4 seconds. Then she stepped out of the elevator. 9:47. She had been on the ballroom platform giving her presentation at 9:47. She had been standing in front of 400 witnesses, microphone in hand, talking about third quarter restructuring. Whatever had happened to those files, she had not done it. But Harlan Voss knew that, which meant he didn't need the accusation to be true. He only needed it to be credible long enough to do damage. That was a different and more dangerous thing. She crossed the lobby without hurrying, because hurrying telegraphed weakness. And she had not survived 4 years at the top of this industry by telegraphing weakness. But her mind was moving fast and cold, cataloging what she knew and what she didn't, and what the gaps between them might mean. Harlan Voss had been on the Whitmore board for 11 years, longer than she had been running the company. He was 63, deliberate, the kind of man who wore patience like an expensive coat and never let you see him sweat. He had voted against her appointment as CEO 4 years ago and had spent the intervening years being professionally courteous about it, while, she now suspected, being something else entirely underneath. She had always known he was waiting, she had not known for what. Now she had a better idea. She pushed through the doors into the East Lounge and found him immediately, gray suit, silver hair, a glass of something amber in one hand. Standing with 2 board members she recognized, Gerald Fitch and Donna Stroud, both of whom had the careful expression of people who have just been told something upsetting and are deciding what to do with it. Voss saw her and did not change his expression at all, which told her more than any expression would have. "Sabrina," he said, "we were just discussing the evening." "I heard," she said. "We should find a room." "I think here is fine," Voss said pleasantly, "given the circumstances." She looked at him for a moment. I was doing the thing where the public nature of the location was a weapon, where forcing a confrontation in a semi-visible space made anything she said feel defensive, and anything he said feel like reasonable concern. He was good at it. She had watched him use it on other people. "The escrow files were accessed at 9:47, she said, keeping her voice level. "I was on a microphone in front of this company's entire investor base at 9:47. Whatever story you've been given about those credentials, it has a very short shelf life." Something moved briefly behind Voss's eyes and was gone. "No one's told any story," he said. "We're simply trying to understand what happened." "Then let's understand it together," Sabrina said. "In a room with legal counsel present, not here." Gerald Fitch looked uncomfortable. Donna Stroud was watching Sabrina with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not hostile, not supportive, somewhere in between, which was where Donna usually lived. Sabrina made a note of it. She left them without waiting for Voss to respond, pulled out her phone, and dialed her general counsel, who picked up on the second ring and said, "I already know. I'm on my way up." "Get here fast," Sabrina said, "and pull the server access logs yourself. I don't want anyone else touching them." She hung up, stood for a moment in the corridor outside the lounge, back straight, phone in hand. The gala noise filtered down from above. Somewhere in the lobby behind her, a group of late arrivals laughed at something. She thought about Ava, the sound of her voice, the single, impossible word. Then she put it away, the way she had learned to put things away, into a compartment she could open later when she had the space for it, and she walked toward the manager's office. Logan was still there. She hadn't expected that. She had half expected Devaney to have quietly released him, or for him to have requested to leave. Instead, he was sitting in the same chair, in the same posture, and Ava was asleep in the chair beside him. Not in Sabrina's chair. In the chair directly next to Logan's, her small body tipped sideways, head near his shoulder but not quite touching it, the plush rabbit she must have had in her coat pocket clutched against her chest. Logan looked up when Sabrina came in. Devaney was gone. "She went out about 20 minutes ago," Logan said quietly, with a nod toward Ava. "I didn't want to move her." Sabrina stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her daughter's sleeping face. Ava looked different asleep than she did awake. Younger, less watchful. The vigilance that she carried in her waking hours, the constant scanning, the hyper-attention to everything visible and tactile that deaf children often developed as compensation, was gone, and underneath it was just a 7-year-old who was tired and had found somewhere she felt safe enough to stop paying attention. "You've been sitting here for an hour," Sabrina said. "Didn't have anywhere urgent to be." She looked at him. "Your shift." "Devaney covered it," he said. "His call, not mine." She came in and sat down across from him, in Devaney's chair, because the alternative was standing, and she had been standing for 3 hours, and something in the back of her left knee had started to ache. She set her phone face up on the desk between them. It buzzed once, her counsel, and she silenced it with her thumb without looking at it. "She said another word," Logan told her. Sabrina went still. "About 40 minutes ago, I asked if she was cold. I know she can't hear me, but she reads well, and I kept it simple, and she said no." He paused. "Clear as anything." Sabrina looked at Ava, then at the floor, then at Logan. "The specialist told me it was possible," she said, "that there wasn't a physical barrier, that something was—" They used the phrase emotional block, which I always thought was a way of saying they didn't know. She stopped. 7 years of not knowing. "She's not broken," Logan said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even particularly gentle. It was just a statement, the way you state something you're certain of. But it landed somewhere tender, and Sabrina felt her jaw tighten. "I know that," she said. He held her gaze for a moment and then looked at Ava, and the conversation moved on the way conversations do when both people decide to let something pass. "Can I ask you something?" Sabrina said. "Sure." "The way you were with her, in the corridor, that's not— most people don't know to do that, to stay still, to keep their mouth visible." She watched him. "Where does that come from?" Logan was quiet for a moment in the way she was beginning to understand was just how he processed things. Not evasive, just thorough. "I spent some time working with people in bad situations," he said. "Civilians. People who'd been through things that made them shut down the way she was shut down. You learn pretty fast that crowding someone who's scared doesn't help. Giving them a choice about whether to come closer, that's usually what gets through." "What kind of work?" she asked. "Military," he said. "A while back." She waited for more. He didn't offer it. "Why maintenance?" she said, and regretted it immediately. It was the kind of question that sounded like judgment dressed up as curiosity, and she knew it. He didn't seem bothered. "Marcus needs me on a schedule," he said. Overnight shift, I'm home before his school day starts. Maintenance work, I set my own pace. It suits the situation." A brief thing crossed his face that might have been something more complicated, but it was gone before she could read it. "Not everything has to be a career, Ms. Whitmore." "Sabrina," she said reflexively. He nodded once. "Sabrina." Her phone lit up again. This time she looked. Her security chief, Marcus Webb, flagging urgent. She stood up. "I have to deal with something upstairs," she said. "I'll send someone—" "She's fine here," Logan said, "unless you want her moved." Sabrina looked at her sleeping daughter. The rabbit. The chair pulled a few inches toward Logan's without anyone making a deliberate decision about it. "I'll be back," she said. She went back upstairs. The server room on the 41st floor was not a room most gala guests knew existed. It was through a keycard door behind the hotel's business center, narrow and humming, and lit with the blue-white light of equipment that ran continuously and didn't care what time it was. Marcus Webb was already there when Sabrina arrived, along with a woman she recognized as the hotel's IT director and her own general counsel, a compact and precise man named David Ewan, who had been with the Whitmore Group for 6 years and who did not waste words under any circumstances. "Access log shows your credentials, your password at 947, David said. "But the login location is a terminal on the 39th floor, the AV room." "I was on the ballroom stage at 9:47, Sabrina said. "On camera." "I know that," David said. "The credential was spoofed. Someone had your login information in advance and used a terminal that doesn't have coverage in the hotel's primary camera grid." "The AV room has a camera," Webb said. "Hotel confirmed it, but the footage for the 9:40 to 10 p.m. window is gone." Sabrina absorbed that. Someone had prepared for this carefully. They knew her credentials, which meant either a sophisticated technical breach or an inside source. They knew the AV room's camera coverage gap, which meant either detailed advanced knowledge of the hotel system or access to someone who had it. And they had chosen tonight specifically, which meant they had been waiting for an event large enough that chaos would serve as cover. Who else had access to my login? She asked. Officially, David said. No one. Your IT department manages your credentials. But your password was changed 8 weeks ago after the system audit, and whoever did this had the new version. 8 weeks. Sabrina thought through that window. The system audit had been internal, run by her own team. The new credentials had been distributed through encrypted channels. The number of people who could have intercepted them was not large. I want names, she said. Everyone who touched that audit. I've already started that list, David said. But that's going to take time we may not have tonight. Voss has been working the room for the last 30 minutes. 2 more board members are now in conversation with him. He's framing this as a competence issue, not a fraud issue. He's saying the documentation gap represents a systemic failure of oversight, which falls on you as CEO. Sabrina pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and then lowered her hand. She did not get headaches often, but the beginning of one was forming behind her left eye. He doesn't need to prove I did anything wrong, she said. He just needs enough board members to question my judgment long enough to call for an emergency review. That's about where I've got it figured, David said. And the actual escrow documentation? Gone from the server. We're pulling from backup, but the backup was also partially compromised. Someone ran a targeted deletion. Professional. It'll take my team until at least tomorrow morning to fully reconstruct it. So tonight we have nothing to put in front of investors, Sabrina said. Tonight we have your word, David said, and the timestamp on the stage camera. She looked at him. He looked back, calm and direct, because that was what she paid him to be, and because he was good at his job. She had always appreciated that about David. He didn't dress things up. Okay, she said. Keep working the backup recovery. I want something I can show before midnight if it's possible. She left the server room and stood in the corridor outside, alone for the first time in hours. The hallway was quiet here, the hum of the business center the only sound. She felt the familiar tightening across her chest. Not fear, exactly, because fear was too simple a word for what happened to her in moments like this. More like the physical sensation of things narrowing, options closing, the room getting smaller. She had built the Whitmore Group on a principle she had never said out loud to anyone, which was that if you were fast enough and smart enough and willing to work harder than anyone around you, you could stay ahead of the bad thing. You could outrun it. She had believed that since she was 22 years old and watching her father's company hemorrhage money while his health collapsed, and she had made it true often enough that it had become a kind of personal law. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure she was ahead of it. Her phone buzzed. Webb, you need to come back to the ballroom. Something happening. She walked. The blackout hit at 10:51. Not the whole hotel, just the ballroom floor, the event spaces, the connected corridor running east toward the service elevator bank. Emergency lighting kicked in 6 seconds later, which was long enough for 400 people to make a significant amount of noise in the dark, and long enough for several other things to happen that were harder to track. Sabrina was at the edge of the ballroom when it went dark, and she went immediately to the wall, one hand against the surface, orienting herself, because that was what you did when vision was gone. You found something solid, and you didn't move until you understood the space. Her eyes adjusted to the emergency lights. Around her the noise was rising, not screaming. These were not people who screamed in public, by and large, but the tight, controlled anxiety of 400 wealthy individuals who were not accustomed to losing control of their environment. Security staff were moving, their earpieces lit with communication. Wait staff had stopped moving entirely, which was the correct training response, and meant that somewhere someone was running the room's emergency protocol. She heard Webb's voice before she saw him, coming in from the corridor. Miss Whitmore. He was beside her, phone out, flashlight enabled. The outage was triggered manually. Someone cut the primary feed from the circuit panel on 39, same floor as the AV room. Same floor, she said. Yeah. The circuit panel on 39, that's a maintenance access point. Keycard and manual override, Webb said. The keycard log shows... He stopped. Whose card? She said. Logan Pierce's, Webb said. The maintenance supervisor. Sabrina stood very still. The emergency lighting was a flat amber that made everyone look like they were waiting for something bad. And the noise in the ballroom had not settled, and somewhere in the managed chaos a specific thought arrived in her head with a clarity she didn't want. Logan Pierce. 14 months at the Alderton. Military background he hadn't elaborated on. In a service corridor at 9-something with her daughter. Access to maintenance systems throughout the hotel. And now his keycard on a circuit panel that had just taken out the power to the event that was causing her the worst night of her professional life. She thought about the way he had sat in that chair, patient, reading the room. She thought about Ava asleep in the chair beside him. Don't move on him yet, she said. Webb looked at her. I said don't move. I want the corridor camera from 39 first. I want to see who actually used that panel. His card? Cards get borrowed, she said. Cards get cloned. I've been framed once tonight already. I'm not going to frame someone else on the same quality of evidence. She met his eyes. 39th floor camera. Now. Webb hesitated for exactly 1 second, which was long enough for her to understand that he had a personal read on this situation that was not the same as hers. But he was a professional. He nodded and moved. In the ballroom, 2 security guards were moving people toward the exits in the calm, managed way of people who had rehearsed this, which was when Sabrina noticed the other movement, the wrong kind, the kind that didn't fit the pattern of frightened people following instructions. 3 individuals, not in uniform, not moving toward the exits, moving toward the stage, toward the presentation stations where the investor documentation terminals were set up. They were not guests. Sabrina could not have explained precisely how she knew this. Something in the movement, too deliberate, too oriented, not looking around the way frightened people look around. They knew where they were going. The darkness and the confusion were not an inconvenience to them. They were the plan. She pulled out her phone and dialed Webb back. Ballroom stage, she said. Right now. 3 individuals heading for the presentation terminals. They're not guests. Then she turned and went back to the elevator because her daughter was on the lobby level in a manager's office with a man whose keycard had just appeared in a place that was either a coincidence or something much worse. And until she knew which it was, she needed to be closer to Ava than she currently was. The elevator took 40 seconds to arrive. It was the longest 40 seconds of her night, and the night had already been full of them. The doors opened. She stepped in. Behind her, in the amber-lit ballroom, the 3 individuals had reached the stage and were pulling cables from the terminals with practiced efficiency. They had maybe 4 minutes before security reached them. Maybe 3. Downstairs, Ava slept. And Logan Pierce sat in a chair in a manager's office, and his keycard was on a circuit panel on the 39th floor, and Sabrina Whitmore was in an elevator going down with 17 different versions of the same question running through her head and no clean answers to any of them. The doors closed. She kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady. She had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do in a bad situation was let the fear make decisions on your behalf. She had learned it from watching her father do exactly that in the months before she had taken over the company, and she had promised herself she would not be that person. But she was going down to a room where her 7-year-old daughter had spoken her first word to a stranger, and that stranger's keycard was now evidence in a professional sabotage operation. And she was not made of stone, and she never had been, however much she had allowed people to believe otherwise. The elevator hit the lobby level with a soft mechanical thud. The doors opened. She walked. The manager's office door was open when Sabrina reached it, which was the first wrong thing. She had left it pulled almost shut. She remembered that specifically, the click of the latch engaging as she stepped out. It was the kind of detail her mind cataloged automatically, the way it cataloged everything. Because she had spent 4 years running a company where details were the difference between winning and losing, and she had trained herself to notice them the way other people noticed weather. The door was open. Not wide. Maybe 8 inches. She pushed through it. Logan was standing. That was the second wrong thing. Not wrong because it was threatening, but wrong because the posture was different from the one she had left behind. He was on his feet near the center of the room, facing the door, which meant he had heard her coming from far enough out that he'd had time to stand and orient. Ava was still in the chair, but she was awake now, sitting up straight, the rabbit held against her chest with both hands, her eyes on Logan's face, with an attention that was different from sleep, focused and alert, in a way that Sabrina recognized as the child's version of reading a situation. There was a man she didn't know standing near the window. He was wearing a hotel uniform, the same gray as Logan's, the Alderton crest on the chest pocket. But he was younger, late 20s, and he was holding his phone in a way that was not casual, angled slightly. The screen facing outward at approximately chest height, which was the angle a person used when they were recording without appearing to record. Sabrina looked at Logan. "He came in about 3 minutes ago," Logan said. His voice was level. "Said Devaney sent him to check on things. Devaney didn't send anyone." The younger man lowered his phone. "I work here," he said. "I don't know what he's—" "You're from the 39th floor," Logan said. Not an accusation, just a statement, delivered the same way he stated everything, with a completeness that didn't invite argument. "Your shoes have the same dust on the left heel that's in that corridor. It's from the carpet adhesive they're using in the renovation area up there. I noticed it when I was working that section last week." The younger man looked down at his shoe. He couldn't help it. It was involuntary, the way guilt always is when it's surprised. "Who sent you?" Sabrina said. He looked up. He was not a skilled liar. His eyes moved to his left and then came back, and there was a half-second of recalculation she could see happening behind his face. "I told you." Devaney is on the 41st floor managing a server access crisis," Sabrina said. "He didn't send you. Try again." The man's jaw shifted. He looked at Logan, then back at Sabrina, and she could see him running the math, how much trouble he was already in versus how much worse it could get, and arriving at the wrong conclusion, which was that movement was better than explanation. He made a step toward the door. Logan was simply there. He hadn't appeared to move quickly, but he was between the man and the door with the kind of physical economy that made speed look effortless. And his hand was on the door frame and his body was in the space, and none of it was aggressive. He just occupied the exit the way a door occupies a frame. "I wouldn't," Logan said. The younger man stopped. "Sit down," Sabrina said. "We're going to wait here until my security chief arrives, and then you're going to answer his questions instead of mine. And you should probably think about the fact that what you do in the next 4 minutes determines whether tonight ends with you as a witness or a suspect." She pulled out her phone and dialed Webb without taking her eyes off the man. Webb answered on the first ring. "I need you in Devaney's office," she said. "Lobby level. We have a person of interest." She hung up. The man sat down. He didn't speak again, which was the smartest decision he'd made since walking through the door. Sabrina looked at Logan. He was watching the seated man with a peripheral attention, tracking him without appearing to focus on him, the way you watched something you didn't fully trust. And with his other attention, he was watching Ava. The child had not looked away from him since Sabrina came in. Her small hands were still tight on the rabbit. "Your card," Sabrina said to Logan, low enough that it was between them. "Webb flagged your key card on the 39th floor circuit panel, the one that cut the power." Logan looked at her. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. The look of someone who has seen this kind of move before. "My card's been on my belt since 6 p.m., he said. "Same as always." "Can you prove that?" He reached to his belt and unclipped the key card lanyard, held it out to her. She took it and looked at the card. The magnetic strip was intact. The surface was normal. "They can clone a key card in under a minute with the right equipment," Logan said. "And I've been in and out of that section all week for the renovation work. Anyone who knew my access points could have cloned it during any one of a dozen opportunities." "That's a very specific thing to know about cloning keycards," Sabrina said. "That's a very specific operation someone's running in this hotel tonight," Logan said back, and his tone was not defensive or impatient. It was precise. "The power cut, the document theft, the credential spoofing on your login, the person in this room just now with a camera running. These aren't separate problems. They're a sequence." Sabrina looked at him for a long moment. "Upstairs," she said. 3 people I didn't recognize were at the stage terminals when the lights went out, going for the presentation data." Logan nodded slowly. "That's the 3rd phase," he said. "Third. 1. Take out the documentation backing your position. 2. Cut power to create cover and confusion. 3. Pull whatever data they can from the presentation systems before security resets." They'd want everything: investor contacts, deal structures, anything proprietary that gives them leverage. He paused. "If they get enough, The missing escrow files become secondary. They have enough to build a case against you without them. Sabrina stared at him. You're describing this like a mission briefing. I'm describing it like what it is. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of the hotel above them, muffled footsteps, the vibration of an elevator somewhere in the wall. The man sitting near the window was looking at his own hands. Why are you still here? Sabrina said. Logan's brow moved slightly. Here in the room? Here in this hotel, tonight. You could have walked out of this office at any point. Your shift supervisor covered your responsibilities. No one would have blinked. She watched him. But you're still here. He looked at Ava. The child met his gaze with that same total attention. He looked back at Sabrina. I didn't like the way that man came through the door, he said. It was not a complicated answer. It was also, she felt, not the complete answer. But Webb arrived before she could press it, coming through the door with two of the gala's contracted security personnel behind him, and the room shifted into a different mode, the mode of official action, of documented procedure, of the world grinding forward on its institutional tracks. Webb handled the man near the window with the efficient seriousness of someone who had done this kind of work before finding his current position. He didn't raise his voice. He asked 4 questions, listened to 4 non-answers, and then said something quietly to one of the security personnel who produced a zip tie from his jacket pocket and secured the man's wrist to the chair arm with a practiced efficiency that suggested this was not the first time this evening had required it. Hotel's outside security team is dealing with the 3 from the ballroom, Webb told Sabrina, pulling her aside near the door. We've got them in a conference room on 40. One of them already wants to talk. The other 2 are lawyering up, which means they know what they did and they're deciding what it's worth. The one who wants to talk, Sabrina said. Is he connected to the board? He works for a consulting firm, Webb said. The firm has a contract relationship with Voss Capital Partners, which is Harlan Voss's personal investment vehicle. He stopped. Let that sit. Sabrina looked at him. Say it. Voss didn't just want your board votes, Webb said. This was designed to flip the company. Full takeover play. If the escrow documentation is missing, if there's a competence narrative on the record, and if they pull enough proprietary investor data from your systems tonight, they have the foundation for an emergency board vote calling for leadership review. You'd be out before Christmas. Sabrina had known this was the shape of it. She had known it intellectually from the moment she read David's first message. But hearing it stated flatly in a dim lobby office at 11 p.m. was different from knowing it, and she felt the full weight of it settle on her for exactly the 3 seconds she allowed herself. Then she straightened. What do we still need? She said. The footage from the AV room, Webb said. 39th floor. If we can place whoever used that terminal on camera before or after the 947 window, even in the corridor, we can break the credential frame, and we need the investor data confirmed as intact. If they didn't successfully pull it before we shut the terminals down, Voss has no leverage. David's team is on the data, Sabrina said. The footage, I can get the footage, Logan said. Both of them looked at him. He was standing a few feet away, not interrupting so much as entering the conversation at the point where he had something useful to add. Ava had moved. She was now standing beside him, her shoulder against his arm, the rabbit at her side. The 39th floor AV room has a secondary recording buffer, Logan said. Physical, not networked. It's part of the hotel's legacy system from the last renovation. They never pulled it out when they upgraded to digital. It feeds to a local drive inside the AV cabinet itself. Whatever deleted the networked footage wouldn't have touched it, because it's not connected to the same system. Webb looked at him steadily. And you know this because I replaced the cabling in that cabinet 6 weeks ago, Logan said. The drive's behind the secondary panel. It's not labeled. Most of the IT staff doesn't know it's there. The room was very quiet. Sabrina looked at Webb. Webb looked at Logan. Logan waited. If it's there and it has footage, Sabrina said carefully, that drive is evidence. We can't just... You need NYPD or a licensed investigator to pull it officially, Logan said. I know, I'm not suggesting I touch it. I'm suggesting you get someone with authority to that room in the next 20 minutes before whoever deleted the network footage realizes they missed a secondary system and goes back to fix their mistake. Webb already had his phone out. I've got a contact at the Midtown South Precinct, he said. They've been on standby for the event anyway. If I explain what we need, Make the call, Sabrina said. Webb stepped into the corridor. The room was quiet again. The man by the window was looking at the wall. Ava moved slightly closer to Logan, close enough now that her small hand found the side of his, not gripping it, just resting there, fingers against fingers, the way a child reaches for something solid without wanting to make a big thing of it. Logan looked down at her. Something in his face did what faces do sometimes when they encounter something they were not braced for. It softened at the edges in a way that was not soft, because his face was not a soft face. It was more like the moment before softness, the preparation for it. Ava looked up at him. Her lips moved. Sabrina was watching. She saw it. Scared, Ava said, quiet as a breath, clear as a bell. Logan crouched down to her level in the same single-knee posture as the corridor, unhurried, settled. I know, he said. It's loud up there, and there are a lot of people moving around. Ava considered this. Then, you're not scared. I've been scared, he said, just not right now. Why not right now? He looked at her for a moment. Because you're here, he said, and that makes it easier to think straight. Ava looked at him the way children look at adults when they are testing whether the adult means what they said or is performing meaning, which children are often more perceptive about than adults give them credit for. Whatever she found in his face, she accepted it. She turned and looked at her mother, and for the first time all evening, maybe for the first time in longer than Sabrina wanted to examine, the look was not careful. It was not the watchful, measuring look of a child who has learned to manage the distance between herself and the person who loves her. It was just a look, plain and direct. Sabrina's throat was tight. She didn't trust herself to speak, which was a problem she was not accustomed to having and did not have a protocol for. She crouched down too, across from Logan, so she was at Ava's eye level. The three of them were close together in the amber-lit room, and the man by the window and the zip tie and the sabotage operation and Harlan Voss and all 42 floors of the Alderton Hotel were briefly somewhere else. Are you okay? Sabrina signed, and also said aloud because Ava was apparently using both channels now, and she didn't want to miss a single one. Ava looked at her. Then she did something she had not done, not once, not in recent memory. She leaned forward and put her head against Sabrina's shoulder. Not dramatically, just placed it there, the way you put something down in a spot that belongs to it. Sabrina put her arm around her daughter and did not say anything, and breathed. Webb came back in 90 seconds later, which was not enough time, but the world didn't wait for moments to finish. Precinct Contact is sending a plainclothes detective to the 39th floor now, he said, and we've got a second problem. Sabrina stood. Ava stood with her, still close. Voss called an emergency board session, Webb said. He's using the conference suite on 42. He's reached 5 of the 9 board members. Claims there's enough present to constitute a quorum for a preliminary vote on leadership review. He paused. The vote would be non-binding without a formal 48-hour notice period, but if he gets it on record tonight, even informally, he builds his paper trail. He's moving fast, Sabrina said. He planned to move fast, Logan said. He was standing again, Ava beside him. Everything that's happened tonight is compressed into a 2-hour window. The credential theft, the power cut, the data pull attempt. Now the board move. It's all timed. Whatever evidence he needs manufactured has to be in place before this building gets its lights back on completely and people start asking real questions. Sabrina looked at him again. She had been looking at him a lot tonight, and each time she did, he gave her something she hadn't expected. You know this pattern, she said. It wasn't a question this time. I've seen versions of it, he said, in the military. In places where people wanted control of something bad enough to hurt other people for it, he said. The details change, the structure doesn't. Webb said, We need to move, Ms. Whitmore. I know, she said. She looked at Ava. She can't be in this building when it escalates. My neighbor in Queens, Logan said immediately. She's up. I texted Marcus already to let her know I'd be late. She's got a daughter Ava's age. I can call her right now. Sabrina looked at him. The offer was so immediate and so practical and so devoid of any attempt to make it seem like more than it was that she felt something shift in her chest. Not the soft thing, not yet, but the thing before that, which was the recognition that someone was reliable without needing to be asked to be. She doesn't know your neighbor, Sabrina said. She doesn't know anyone, Logan said, not unkindly. But she trusts me, and I'll call ahead and she'll meet us at the door, and it's better than a 7-year-old being in a hotel where men in masks are getting zip-tied in offices. There was no good argument against that. Sabrina knew it. She crouched in front of Ava again, signed carefully. I have to fix something upstairs. Logan's going to take you somewhere safe. His son Marcus is going to be there. I'll come get you as soon as I can. Ava read her hands. Then she looked at Logan. Then she looked back at Sabrina, and she said, out loud, 3 words, imperfect and effortful and absolutely clear. Come back fast. Sabrina's eyes stung. She pressed them shut for exactly 1 second. I will, she said. I promise. She stood up, looked at Logan. If anything happens to her, nothing's going to happen to her, he said. Flat, certain. He meant it. She could hear that he meant it, and she was a person who could generally tell the difference, and it did not resolve every question she had about Logan Pierce, who he was, what he was doing in this hotel, what his keycard was doing on a circuit panel on 39, but it resolved the question of the next hour, which was the only hour she had. She turned to Webb. Take me to 42, she said. I want to walk into that conference room before Voss gets his quorum settled. They moved. Logan's footsteps went the other direction, toward the lobby exit, Ava's smaller steps beside his, and Sabrina did not look back because looking back was the kind of thing that made the hard parts harder, and she needed hard right now. The elevator to 42 was slow, or felt slow, which amounted to the same thing. Webb stood beside her and ran through what he knew about the 5 board members Voss had assembled, and Sabrina listened and filed it, and when the doors opened, she was already building the order of her words. The conference suite was a long, glass-walled room at the north end of the 42nd floor, with a view of Midtown that was genuinely beautiful and entirely wasted on the occasion. She could see through the glass from 20 feet away. Voss at the head of the table, Fitch on his left, Donna Stroud and 2 others she recognized, Paulette Okafor and Richard Tan, arranged in the configuration of people who have been given one version of a story and are waiting for someone to tell them it's wrong. Voss saw her coming before she reached the door. His expression did not change. He was good. She pushed the door open. Sabrina, he said. Same tone as the lounge. Calibrated concern. Harlan, she said. She came in, stood at the foot of the table, and looked at each board member in turn. Not hostile, not apologetic, just present. I appreciate you all being here given the evening. We've had some concerns raised, Fitch started. I know what concerns were raised, Sabrina said, and I can address every one of them. But before I do, I want to ask a question. She looked at Voss. What's the name of the consulting firm you hired for your transition planning? The room shifted. It was subtle. The quality of the silence changed, the way a room changes when a window opens. Voss said nothing for 2 seconds, which was too long, because one of the 3 individuals who was pulling data from our presentation terminals 20 minutes ago, Sabrina said, works for a firm with a contract relationship to Voss Capital Partners, and he is currently in a conference room on 40 with hotel security and an NYPD detective who is very interested in his answers. Paulette Okafor sat back slightly. Richard Tan looked at Voss. Donna Stroud said, Harlan, what is she talking about? She's deflecting, Voss said, and his voice was still smooth, still controlled, but something had shifted in the current under it. The documentation gap represents a serious... The documentation gap was manufactured, Sabrina said. My credentials were spoofed from a terminal on 39 while I was on a microphone in the ballroom with 400 witnesses. The network footage that would show who used that terminal was deleted, but the hotel has a secondary recording buffer that your team apparently didn't know about, and a detective is pulling that footage right now. She looked around the table. I have run this company for 4 years, she said. I have not always made the right calls. I have made calls that cost us money, and calls that made us money, and calls that I'm still not sure about. But I have never stolen from this company, I have never manufactured a crisis, and I have never tried to destroy someone else's career to protect my own position. She looked at Voss. I can't say the same for everyone in this room. Voss stood up. This is speculation. Sit down, Harlan, Donna Stroud said. He looked at her. Sit down, she said again, and let her finish. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a small one. A woman in her 60s telling a man in his 60s to sit down, in a glass-walled conference room while the lights of Midtown blinked outside. But it was the moment the room turned, and Sabrina felt it turn, and she kept her face neutral because she had not won yet, and she knew it. She had bought time. Evidence was still being gathered. The man on 40 might not give up anything useful. The secondary drive might be blank or damaged. But she was still standing, and Voss had not sat down yet, which meant he was deciding, and men like Voss who were deciding had already begun to lose. He sat down. Sabrina breathed. Somewhere across Midtown, in a Queens apartment, a 7-year-old girl who had not spoken for 7 years was sitting in a stranger's kitchen and learning that strangers could become something else, given enough time and the right kind of quiet. And in a corridor on the 39th floor of the Grand Alderton Hotel, a plainclothes detective was opening an AV cabinet and finding, behind a secondary panel that almost no one knew about, a small physical drive that had been recording faithfully all evening, indifferent to whoever had tried to wipe the truth away. The detective's name was Carla Reyes, and she had been doing this work for 16 years, and she did not get excited about things easily. She got a little excited about the drive. She called Webb at 11:43 from the corridor outside the AV room on 39 and told him in the flat, efficient language of someone filing a verbal report that the secondary buffer drive was intact, had continuous footage from 6 p.m. through the moment of the network deletion, and contained clear time-stamped video of a man in a hotel uniform entering the AV room at 9:31 p.m., accessing the terminal, and exiting at 9:44, 13 minutes that encompassed the exact window of the credential breach on Sabrina's login. The man's face was visible for 4 seconds on entry and 6 seconds on exit. Reyes had already run it through the precinct's identification system on her phone and had a name. The name was not Logan Pierce. Webb came into the conference room on 42 and handed Sabrina his phone with the message from Reyes on the screen, and she read it and handed it back. And she said nothing for a moment because there was a particular kind of exhaustion that came not from the bad news but from the confirmation of what you had already allowed yourself to believe, which was in some ways more draining than the bad news itself. "His name is Derek Souza," Webb said, quiet enough that it was between the two of them. "Contract IT technician, brought in for the gala's presentation system setup, hired through a staffing firm that Voss Capital Partners has used on 3 previous occasions." Sabrina looked across the table at Harlan Voss. He had not left. She had half expected him to find a reason to step out. A phone call, a restroom break, some graceful exit. Because men like Voss were good at finding graceful exits when the terrain shifted. But he was still in his chair, and his glass was empty, and the smoothness he had carried into this room had developed something underneath it now, the way ice develops something underneath it, in weather that has quietly been warming for hours. She thought about how to play the next 3 minutes. She could put the name on the table immediately, expose the connection to his firm in front of Fitch and Stroud and Okafor and Tan, all of whom were still sitting in the careful, assessing way of people who had not yet decided which side of a line they were standing on. That was the move that felt satisfying. It was also the move that gave Voss the most room to maneuver. He would call it circumstantial. He would question the timeline. He would deploy the same smooth patience he had deployed all evening and buy himself another 40 minutes. The other move was to give him a choice. She stood up straighter, looked at Voss directly. "I need 10 minutes, she said, addressing the table but watching him. "There's been a development. I'd like to speak with Harlan privately before we continue." Fitch looked confused. Donna Stroud looked at her with the careful attention of someone who understood the architecture of what was being offered. Okafor and Tan exchanged a brief glance. "I don't see what a private," Fitch started. "That's fine," Voss said. Everyone looked at him. 10 minutes, he said. Still smooth. But something under it had shifted, and Sabrina thought, he knows. He knows the footage exists. He's been waiting to find out if I have it. The board members filed out. Webb moved to follow, and Sabrina caught his eye and gave him a small shake of her head. He stayed near the door, inside the room, because she was not naive, and Voss was not a man she intended to be alone with in a glass-walled room without a witness. The door closed. Voss looked at her across the length of the table. For the first time all evening, he looked his age, which was 63, and tired, which was something she had never seen on him before. "How much?" he said. "All of it," she said. "The AV room footage. Souza, the staffing firm connection to your vehicle." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass walls, the 42nd floor corridor was empty. Manhattan glittered behind him, indifferent and enormous. "It's not enough to convict," he said. "No," she said. "But it's enough to end your career, and that's not the same conversation as conviction." He looked at his empty glass. "What do you want?" "Your resignation from the board," she said. "Tonight. Effective immediately. A prepared statement. David Ewan will draft the language, citing personal reasons and citing the Whitmore Group's strong leadership and positive direction. You send it to the full board mailing list before midnight. And in exchange, I don't walk back into that room and lay out every piece of what happened tonight for 4 board members who are going to repeat it to every investor contact they have by 8 a.m. tomorrow." She paused. "The criminal exposure isn't mine to offer away. Detective Reyes is going to pursue this with or without my cooperation. But what I can control is whether this gets messy publicly or gets handled quietly. That is what I'm offering you." Voss looked at her for a long time. She let him look. "You're 30 years old," he said, and it was not quite a compliment and not quite not one. "I'm aware," she said. He stood up, straightened his jacket in the way of a man performing composure for his own benefit. "I'll need until 11:55, he said, "for the statement." 11:50, she said. "And Harlan." She waited until he looked at her. "The men you had in this building tonight. The one who's talking to Reyes right now. Whatever he says is going to put a picture together regardless of your statement. If there are other people involved, board members, executives, anyone inside the Whitmore Group, and those names come out after midnight through Reyes rather than through you, that's a different situation. That's the situation where you don't get the quiet version." His jaw tightened. Then he nodded, once, short and clipped. He walked out. Sabrina stood alone at the foot of the conference table for exactly the time it took to exhale fully and refill her lungs. Then she turned to Webb. "Get David on the phone," she said. "We're drafting a resignation statement." The next 40 minutes were the kind of work she was genuinely good at, the kind that had no elegance to it, that was just precise and relentless and unglamorous. David on the phone from his car, dictating language while she amended it, while Webb managed communications with Reyes on one channel and with the hotel's security team on another. 2 of the 3 men from the ballroom had been formally detained on NYPD authority. The third, the one who had been willing to talk, was providing a full account that Reyes described in a follow-up message as "more cooperative than I usually see this fast," which Webb interpreted as meaning the man was frightened of whoever had hired him and more frightened of the legal exposure he was sitting inside. Souza, the IT contractor from the AV room, had been picked up in the hotel's parking structure attempting to leave in a rideshare. He had his laptop with him. Reyes's message about the laptop contained the word "significant" underlined, which was not standard law enforcement phrasing and told Sabrina more than any formal report would have. Voss's statement arrived at 11:48. It was 2 paragraphs, appropriately worded, characterizing his resignation as a personal decision driven by shifting priorities and expressing confidence in the Whitmore Group's leadership and future direction. David read it over the phone, suggested one amendment to a phrase that could be walked back later. Voss accepted it without discussion, and it went to the full board mailing list at 11:51. By midnight, the gala had officially ended. The guests had been guided out in a managed, staged process that the hotel's PR team was already describing as a security precaution, a phrase capacious enough to cover almost anything. The ballroom was empty. The amber emergency lighting had been replaced with full power restored at 11:37, which the hotel explained as a technical fault in the circuit panel. Maintenance was addressing it. Sabrina stood in the empty ballroom at 12:16 a.m. and looked at the stage where she had given a presentation that felt like it had happened in a different calendar year. Webb came to stand beside her. "Fitch wants a full board debrief in the morning," he said. "Stroud is asking for a written summary of tonight's events. Okafor called me directly to say she's satisfied with the information so far and will support whatever process you want to run. Tan hasn't responded yet, but Tan never responds to anything before he's thought about it for 12 hours. "That's 4, Sabrina said. "With Voss out, the board is 8. I need 5 for any binding vote." "You have 4 comfortable and 1 pending," Webb said. "The remaining 3 were Voss's, and they're currently deciding whether tonight's events represent an opportunity or a liability. My read is they go quiet for 60 days and then align with wherever the power appears to be." Sabrina nodded. That tracked. What's the data situation? David's team confirmed the presentation terminals were not successfully accessed before security shut them down. Everything's intact. She absorbed that. The escrow documentation was still in reconstruction, but the investor data was clean. The credential frame had been exposed. The resignation was on record. Reyes had 2 cooperating witnesses and a laptop that was apparently interesting. It was not a complete victory. There would be board meetings and legal processes and the lingering damage of a night that would be talked about for years in the financial circles she moved in. The story acquiring details it didn't have as it passed from person to person. She would be managing the aftermath for months. Voss's connections in the industry were extensive, and some of them would close doors that had previously been open, out of loyalty or self-preservation or both. But she was still standing. The company was intact. And Harlan Voss had looked at the evidence she put in front of him and chosen the quiet exit, which meant he had not been willing to bet on his own position when the cards were face up. She thought about Logan Pierce. She pulled out her phone. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which she had expected. "How is she?" Sabrina said. "Asleep," Logan said. "About an hour ago. She and Marcus built some kind of fortress out of couch cushions, and she crashed inside it. My neighbor's daughter is asleep in there too." Sabrina sat down on the edge of the empty stage. The ballroom was cavernous and quiet around her, the chandeliers dimmed, the tables half cleared. "A fortress," she said. "Marcus's design," Logan said. "He takes structural integrity seriously for a 6-year-old. Something loosened in Sabrina's chest that she had not realized she was holding. It came out of her sideways, not as a laugh exactly, but as something in the same neighborhood, an exhale with shape to it. "I'll come get her," she said. "It's late, I know." "She's fine here," Logan said. "It's after midnight. If you need a couple of hours to finish things there, she'll sleep through it." Sabrina looked at the empty stage. "Things are mostly finished," she said. "Good finished or complicated finished?" "Complicated finished," she said, "which is the only kind I usually get." He made a sound that was approximately an acknowledgement, low and brief. Then, "Your security chief called me about the key card." "I know," she said. "I told him to." "He apologized," Logan said, "which I didn't expect." "Webb doesn't apologize unless he thinks he was wrong," she said. "He thought he was wrong." "I wasn't bothered by it," Logan said. "He was doing his job." She looked at her own reflection in the dark surface of the closest table, small and distant, late-night version of herself, the pins coming loose from her hair. "The footage cleared you," she said, "completely. And the man they arrested, Souza, he had your keycard information on his laptop. He'd cloned it a week ago during one of your maintenance runs on 39. A short silence. "That's thorough," Logan said. It was not a compliment to Souza. It was an assessment. "The whole operation was thorough," Sabrina said. "Months of planning. They knew the hotel layout, the camera gaps, the access points. They'd done the work." She paused. "Someone told me tonight it looked like a mission briefing." "Someone sounds like they knew what they were talking about," Logan said, and she could hear the edge of something dry in it, which was as close to humor as she had heard from him. "Logan," she said. "Yeah." She considered how to say the next thing. She was not accustomed to saying things she hadn't pre-processed, and this one had not been pre-processed, and she said it anyway because midnight in an empty ballroom had a way of removing certain filters. "Who are you?" she said. "And I mean that as a real question, not the personnel file version." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "Former Navy SEAL. Did 12 years, including 3 combat deployments and 4 years on a specialized hostage recovery unit. Got out 4 years ago after my wife died. Her name was Claire. Car accident, November. The kids were in the car. Marcus was too. He wasn't hurt, but Claire didn't make it through the night." Sabrina said nothing. She let that sit exactly as it deserved to sit. "I spent about a year doing nothing useful," Logan said, in the flat tone of someone who has made a certain peace with a thing, but not a comfortable peace. "And then I got Marcus in a routine that worked, and I got a job that let me keep the routine, and that's where I am." A brief pause. "I'm not hiding from anything. I just don't advertise it." "Why the Alderton?" she said. "Specifically." "Manager here was a guy I served with," Logan said. "He offered me the position when he heard I was in the city. I took it because it was there and it was stable, and Marcus was finally sleeping through the night, and I didn't want to mess with what was working. Sabrina thought about that. The machinery of a decision, not heroic, not tragic, just practical. A man with a child choosing stability over everything else because stability was what the child needed. She understood that logic. She had made versions of it herself, though her version looked very different from the outside. The things you knew tonight, she said, the way you read the operation, the circuit panel, the cloning, the three-phase sequence. I wasn't running anything, he said. I was just watching, and what I was watching looked familiar. You could have walked away from it, she said, multiple times. After the corridor, after the office, after the blackout. At any point you could have said, not my problem, and driven to Queens. I know, he said. Why didn't you? The pause was different this time, longer and less comfortable. Because Ava was in the building, he said, for the first hour, and then because… He stopped, started again. I spent 4 years trying to be the kind of person Marcus needs me to be, which is mostly just steady, present. The kind of person that doesn't walk away from things because they're complicated. A short beat. Sometimes that's the only thing I've got to offer, and it's enough to not walk away. Sabrina pressed her thumb to the corner of her eye. The action was small and private, and she was alone in a ballroom, so it didn't matter, and still she did it quickly, efficiently, as if even when no one was watching, she couldn't afford to be seen doing it. Come tomorrow, she said. When I pick up Ava, I'd like to… There are things I should say in person. She stopped. And I want to know Marcus. He talks a lot, Logan said. I'm warning you. Ava barely talks at all, she said. Maybe they'll average out. He made the sound again, the exhale that wasn't quite a laugh. It was warmer the second time. I'll be there, he said. She said goodnight. She sat for another few minutes in the empty ballroom, phone in her lap, looking at nothing in particular. Then she stood, found a bathroom off the main corridor, ran cold water over her wrists the way her grandmother had taught her when she was small and needed to calm down, which was a piece of advice she had never outgrown. And then she looked in the mirror. The face that looked back was tired. There were marks under her eyes that would be there in the morning. The pins in her hair had mostly surrendered. The midnight blue dress that had cost more than a month's rent looked exactly like something that had been worn through a long, ugly night. She looked, she thought, like a person, which was not always how she looked in mirrors, in the polished, constructed version of her life that she normally moved through. She went back into the corridor and found Webb waiting, because Webb always waited. I'm going home, she said. 2 hours. Shower and a change of clothes. Then I want to be at the board debrief by 7. The debrief isn't until 9, he said. I know, she said. I want to be there at 7. He nodded. They walked toward the elevator. The formal board debrief happened at 9 a.m. in the Whitmore Group's offices on Park Avenue, a room Sabrina knew the way she knew her own kitchen. Every seat, every angle, every quirk of the acoustics that made the far corner harder to hear from. She had run meetings in this room through bad quarters and good ones and everything in between. And she sat at the head of the table and watched the faces of 7 board members. Voss's seat visibly empty, which was its own kind of statement. And she told them the complete version of the previous night. Not a managed version, not a PR version. The real one, with the parts that made her look vulnerable included, because she had decided somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m. that the transparent version was the only one that would actually work, and that the instinct to control every perception was the same instinct that had been slowly calcifying her for years. She told them about the credential theft and the cloning, and Souza and the consulting firm's connection to Voss Capital Partners. She told them about the 3 individuals at the stage terminals and what they had been going after. She told them about the secondary drive and what Reyes had found on it. David Ewan laid out the evidentiary chain with the methodical clarity that she paid him for. Webb provided the security timeline. Reyes had provided a written summary of the overnight investigation, which David read sections of when the board had specific questions. When it was done, Fitch said, "Why didn't you call law enforcement immediately when the credential breach was discovered?" "Because I needed to understand the scope before I moved," Sabrina said. "If I called NYPD at the first sign of trouble, the people running this operation would have heard the sirens and walked out with the laptop, and we'd have nothing but a deleted file and a bad night. I made a call. You can disagree with it." Fitch considered that. He did not say he disagreed with it. Donna Stroud said, "The maintenance supervisor, Logan Pierce. His name is in several of these reports as a material contributor to what you were able to piece together. He's currently a hotel employee. He was, Sabrina said. As of this morning, he's terminated from the Alderton. The room looked at her. I offered him a position with the Whitmore Group this morning, she said. Director of Corporate Security. He hasn't accepted yet. I expect he'll have questions about the hours. Something moved around the table, some, not exactly humor, but something adjacent to it, a slight release of the formality that had been holding the room together all morning. Okafor said, "And your daughter?" Sabrina looked at her. The question was unexpected in this room, and Okafor knew it. There was a slight hesitation after she asked it, as if she was deciding whether to take it back. "She's well," Sabrina said. "Thank you for asking." She meant it more than the two words covered, which was often true of the things she said in this room, and probably most rooms, because she had not learned yet how to make the outside of her words match the inside of them. She was working on it. She had been working on it for 30 years and was somewhere in the middle of the project. The debrief wound down. Board members collected their materials. There were handshakes and the particular kind of quiet professional warmth that meant people were relieved in ways they wouldn't admit to. Fitch paused beside her on his way out. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I didn't know what Harlan was planning. I want you to know that." She looked at him. Gerald Fitch was 61, cautious, a company man in the way that people who had spent a career in boardrooms became company men, loyal to stability first and principle second, which wasn't heroic but was honest. She had always respected his consistency even when it worked against her. "I believe you," she said. He nodded. He left. She stood in the emptying room and thought about Harlan Voss, who was by now consulting with his lawyers, who was looking at a criminal exposure that her choices last night had not fully contained, who had spent months constructing something careful and specific, and had seen it come apart in a single night because a maintenance supervisor had noticed carpet adhesive on a man's shoe and a 7-year-old girl had wandered into a service corridor. History turned on strange things. She had known that intellectually. She was beginning to know it in a more physical way, the way you knew things that had actually happened to you. Her phone buzzed. Not Webb. Not David. A number she had added to her contacts at 2 a.m. that morning when she got home and realized she didn't have it, and stood in her kitchen texting herself his name so she wouldn't lose it. Marcus wants to know if Ava likes pancakes. He's planning the menu. She read it twice. Then she typed back, "She's never had a preference she'd tell anyone. But I think yes." 3 seconds. Good. He makes a lot. She set the phone face down on the conference table and stood in the quiet room for a moment, and the thing that was in her chest was not a complicated thing. It was, in fact, embarrassingly simple, which was maybe why it had taken her so long to recognize it. She was looking forward to something, not strategically, not as a managed outcome, just forward, the way you look when you're not bracing for what's next. She picked up her bag, walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby where the December morning was coming through the glass doors, and the city outside was doing what it always did, which was move, indifferently and completely, carrying everyone inside it toward whatever was coming next. She pushed through the doors and went to get her daughter. The apartment in Queens was on the 3rd floor of a narrow brick building on a street that had a dry cleaner on one end and a Dominican restaurant on the other, and the hallway smelled like someone had been cooking something with garlic recently, which was not an unpleasant smell but was a very specific one, and Sabrina stood outside the door at 9:47 in the morning in her second outfit of the day and rang the bell. She heard through the door the sound of a child's voice, high and fast and certain, the way 6-year-old voices were certain about everything. Then feet on a hard floor. Then Logan's voice, lower, saying something she couldn't make out. Then the door opened. Marcus Pierce was small and brown-eyed and had his father's way of occupying space directly, without apology. He looked at Sabrina for exactly 1 second with the assessing frankness of a child who had not yet learned to disguise assessment as politeness, and then he said, "Are you Ava's mom?" "I am," Sabrina said. "She's in the fort," he said. "We reinforced it last night. You can come in, but you have to be careful of the east wall because it's load-bearing." Sabrina looked past him at Logan, who was standing in the hallway behind his son with his arms crossed and an expression that was doing its best to be neutral. "He's been calling it load-bearing since 6 a.m., Logan said. "I don't know where he got it." "You said it when you fixed the shelf," Marcus said, without turning around. already walking back into the apartment with the confidence of someone who had extended an invitation and expected it to be followed. The apartment was not large. It was clean in the way of places where someone had made a sustained effort rather than a natural one. Things put away not because they naturally gravitated toward order, but because order had been decided upon and maintained by will. There were books on a low shelf, mostly non-fiction, a few children's titles stacked horizontally on top because they didn't fit standing up. A kitchen with a table that had one chair slightly different from the others, suggesting it had been replaced at some point and not perfectly matched. On the wall near the window, a photograph. A woman, laughing, looking off-camera, hair blowing, in a plain frame. Sabrina's eyes went to it briefly, and then away, because it was not hers to look at for long. The fort was in the living room. It was made of couch cushions and 2 dining chairs, and a blanket that had been engineered across the top with a seriousness that did, in fact, suggest structural consideration. From inside it came a small sound, yet not a word, just the ambient sound of a person who was awake and present. Sabrina crouched at the fort's entrance, which was a gap between 2 cushions approximately the width of a child's shoulders. "Ava," she said. A pause. Then Ava's face appeared in the gap. She was rumpled from sleep, hair escaping whatever it had been in the night before, the plush rabbit tucked under her arm. She looked at her mother with the direct, quiet look that Sabrina had spent 7 years trying to decode. Then she crawled out of the fort and stood up and walked the 4 steps to Sabrina and leaned against her without ceremony, the way children lean when they are tired and finished performing and just want to be somewhere familiar. Sabrina held her, crouched there on the floor of a queen's apartment in her good clothes, arms around her daughter, and did not say anything for a while because there was nothing useful to say. And she was getting better, slowly, at knowing the difference between silence that needed to be filled and silence that needed to be left alone. Marcus had disappeared into the kitchen. She heard cabinet sounds, the particular rattle of a pan. "He's making eggs," Logan said from the doorway. "Fair warning, he puts a lot of stuff in them." "What kind of stuff?" Sabrina said. "Whatever's open," he said. "It's usually fine." She looked up at him. He was leaning in the doorway with his arms still crossed, still in the clothes he'd clearly been in since last night. He had not had time to change, she realized, because he had spent the night here managing 2 small children after spending the previous evening managing a corporate sabotage crisis in a midtown hotel. He looked tired. Not a performance of tiredness, but the real article, the kind with specific weight to it. "You should sleep," she said. "I will," he said. "After eggs." She stood up. Ava stayed against her side, which she was still not entirely accustomed to. The closeness of it, the uncomplicated physical claim her daughter was suddenly making in a way she hadn't before. She put a hand on Ava's shoulder and they walked into the kitchen together. The eggs were, as advertised, full of things, peppers, and what appeared to be leftover rice and cheese that Marcus had grated himself with significant intensity. He served them on plates that were slightly too large for the table, pulling a step stool over to reach the stovetop with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before and had been trusted to do it, which told Sabrina something about Logan she hadn't expected. The 4 of them sat at the small kitchen table, and Marcus talked about the fort's structural problems, about a movie he and Ava had watched part of before falling asleep, about a kid at school named Derek who had strong and apparently controversial opinions about which dinosaur was the best one. Ava watched him with the same focused attention she gave to things that interested her, and once, when he said something she found funny, a face he made while describing Derek, she made a sound that was short and surprised and genuine, which was as close to laughing as Sabrina had heard from her in a long time. Logan ate without speaking much, which was his way, and refilled everyone's water without being asked. And when Marcus started in on a second wind of the dinosaur discourse, he said, "Marcus," in a tone that was not harsh but had a ceiling in it, and Marcus said, "Right, sorry," and redirected himself toward his eggs. It was not a beautiful morning. The kitchen light was ordinary. The eggs were good, but not remarkable. Marcus had put in slightly too much pepper, and Ava made a face after her first bite that she quickly smoothed over, which Sabrina caught, and which Logan caught. And they looked at each other briefly over the table, and Sabrina felt something she had not felt in the company of another adult for a very long time, which was the specific warmth of shared observation, the small comedy of a moment that belonged to both of them. It was such a minor thing. She filed it away anyway. After breakfast, she helped clear the table. Logan moved to take the plates, and she was already at the sink, and for a moment they were both standing in the same small space, plates in hands, arriving at the same destination from slightly different angles, and they navigated it without making it a thing, the way adults navigated small physical proximities when they were paying attention to something else. "The position," she said, handing him a plate. "I meant it." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about it." "And?" He set the plate in the drying rack. "It's a significant change," he said. "The schedule Marcus and I have, it works because it's predictable. Overnight maintenance is predictable. Corporate security at a company like yours is not predictable," she said. "Right. I know that," she said. "And I'm not going to tell you that it would be simple, because it wouldn't, but I would—" She stopped. "Organize the next part. I would make accommodation for Marcus. Whatever the schedule needs to be. School pickup, coverage on late nights. That's not charity. That's what the position requires if I want the right person in it, and I want the right person in it." Logan looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his processing expression, thorough and unhurried, the look of someone who took things seriously enough not to react to them immediately. "Why me specifically?" he said. "You don't know my professional record. You don't know what I actually did in the military beyond what I told you. You've known me for 12 hours, 9 of which were a crisis." "I know what you did in a crisis," she said, "which is what the position requires." She looked at him directly. "You read a professional operation in real time and broke it down accurately without access to any intelligence I wasn't also sitting on. You protected my daughter without being asked and without making it a point of leverage. You told Webb to get the detective to the AV room before the secondary drive could be wiped, which is the single decision that made everything else possible last night." She paused. "And you didn't take credit for any of it. You just did it and moved on." He was quiet for a moment. "That last part isn't a professional quality." "No," she said, "but it's a reason I trust the professional qualities." The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of Marcus and Ava in the living room. Marcus describing something, Ava apparently listening, the occasional punctuation of a small sound from her that might have been agreement or might have been something else. "Let me look at the specifics," Logan said. "Job description, hours, the practical structure. If it works for Marcus, I'll say yes." "That's fair," she said. He looked at her for one more moment, and she looked back. And it was not a dramatic thing, not the movie version of a moment where something begins. It was more like the moment just before that. The moment where two people silently confirm that something is real and then go back to doing the dishes, because the dishes still need to be done regardless of what is real. She handed him the last plate. He set it in the rack. 3 months passed the way time passes when it is full. Not quickly, not slowly, but with a density to it that made January feel close to December and far from it at the same time. The criminal case that Detective Reyes built through December and into the new year was thorough in the way that good detective work was thorough, not dramatic, mostly unglamorous, built on the laptop and the testimonies of 2 men who had decided that cooperation was better than solidarity, and on the AV room footage that showed Derek Souza's face for those 10 clear seconds that a jury would later find very hard to argue with. By February, Harlan Voss had been indicted on charges including corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft of trade secrets. His attorneys were excellent, and the case would take time, but the indictment itself and the accompanying press ended the portion of his career that had always mattered most to him, which was the portion where people returned his calls. 3 other individuals connected to the operation, including the consulting firm's director who had signed off on the contracts that put Souza and the others inside the Alderton, were named in a civil suit that David Ewan filed on behalf of the Whitmore Group in January. 2 of them settled quickly. The third was still fighting, which David described as a strategic error on their part, and which he appeared mildly pleased about. The Whitmore board reorganized. Voss's seat was filled in February by a woman named Adrienne Cole, a corporate attorney with a background in technology infrastructure who had been on Sabrina's informal list for 2 years and who said yes in a phone call that lasted 11 minutes. Donna Stroud called Sabrina after the appointment was announced and said simply, "Good choice," which was as close to warmth as Donna got, and Sabrina received it as such. Logan started in mid-January. The transition was not seamless. Nothing real ever was. The first 2 weeks had the specific friction of two organizations, his way of working and the Whitmore Group's existing security structure, finding the edges where they didn't fit and grinding against each other. He was direct in ways that some of the existing team found blunt and Sabrina found clarifying. He restructured the visitor access protocol in the first week without asking for approval first, which caused a brief conflict with the office manager that he resolved by explaining his reasoning in a single clear paragraph and then being correct. He came in on time and left when the work was done, which was sometimes 5 o'clock and sometimes 8, and he made no performance of either. He also drove Marcus to school 4 days a week and was home on the 5th day by 3, which was the arrangement Sabrina had built into the position structure before she posted it, and which she had not mentioned to him until he asked because she had not wanted it to feel transactional. When he asked why the schedule was built that way, she said, "Because the person I wanted for this position has a 6-year-old, and a job where the schedule doesn't account for that isn't a job he'd take." He had looked at her for a moment and then said, "Thank you." 2 words. She had turned back to her desk, but she had felt them land somewhere. Ava's progress through those months was not a straight line, because nothing in the territory of human development was ever a straight line, and any therapist or doctor who suggested otherwise was selling something. There were weeks in January where she said very little, where the words that had begun to come in December seemed to recede, not disappear, but go quieter, as if they needed rest. Dr. Miriam Cho, the speech and communication specialist that Sabrina had brought in from a program in Philadelphia with a specific focus on late-onset verbal development in children with hearing disabilities, explained this as consolidation, the brain organizing what it had learned before extending further, which was how all learning actually worked, even if it didn't feel that way from outside. Sabrina had spent 7 years trying to fix Ava. Dr. Cho spent the first session with her, not with Ava, explaining the difference between fixing and supporting, which were two activities that looked similar from a distance and were entirely different up close. The first one centered the person doing it, the second one centered the person receiving it. Sabrina had gone home from that session and sat in her kitchen for a while. She was not a person given to extended self-examination. She found it inefficient and also uncomfortable in the specific way that accurate things were sometimes uncomfortable. But she sat there and she thought about what Dr. Cho had said, and she thought about 7 years of doing the right things in the wrong spirit. The specialists, the equipment, the programs, all chosen and managed and monitored with the same focus control she brought to her portfolio companies. As if the problem of her daughter was a problem of resources and oversight rather than a problem of presence. She thought about a maintenance supervisor kneeling on a marble floor with his palms open. She was not a person who arrived at self-knowledge easily or gracefully. She came at it sideways and late, in kitchen chairs after midnight, and she did not make it into more than it was. But she made it into something. She made it into the decision to sit closer to Ava during sessions instead of across the room. To stop translating every gesture and expression into data about progress and just be there in the way that being there was its own kind of information to a child who had spent her whole life reading every available signal for evidence of safety. By February, Ava was using sign language with a fluency that made Dr. Cho describe her as exceptional, which was a word that Dr. Cho used rarely and meant it when she did. By March, she was speaking in short sentences on days when the words were available, and on the days when they weren't, she signed. And on the days when neither felt right, she communicated through the elaborate visual shorthand she had developed on her own over years, which Dr. Cho encouraged Sabrina to learn rather than work around. Sabrina learned it. It took time. She was not naturally patient with things she was bad at, and she was bad at this at first in the specific way that people who were good at difficult things were bad at easy things. She overworked it, applied too much effort, produced results that were technically correct, and somehow still missed. Ava would watch her carefully constructed signs and then produce a small expression that meant try again, which Sabrina found both humbling and eventually funny. She had not expected to find it funny. That surprised her. Marcus and Ava developed, over the winter months, the specific and slightly strange friendship of two children who were not obviously compatible. Marcus, who processed the world through language, fast and continuous and enthusiastic, and Ava, who processed it through attention and image and the quality of the air in a room. They should have frustrated each other. Instead, they had apparently negotiated a private arrangement where Marcus talked and Ava listened and occasionally produced a response that Marcus treated with enormous seriousness, which was the correct treatment because Ava's responses, when they came, were generally worth serious consideration. Logan told Sabrina, one afternoon in late February, when they were both still at the office past 7 and the building had gone quiet around them, that Marcus had started learning basic sign language from a YouTube channel without being asked. He said he wanted to be able to talk to Ava when she didn't want to use words, Logan said. His framing, not mine. Sabrina looked at him. How long has he been doing it? About 3 weeks, Logan said. He practices at the kitchen table. He's got maybe 30 signs so far, and he's very confident about all of them, including several he's probably doing wrong. She thought about that. A 6-year-old at a kitchen table, practicing his hands for someone he wanted to be able to reach. The uncomplicated generosity of it. He's a good kid, she said. He is, Logan said, without modesty or deflection, because he was not a person who performed humility about things he actually believed. He's also loud and he talks over people and he ate an entire box of crackers last Tuesday and tried to claim he didn't. Ava does that thing where she pretends she can't read your signing when you're telling her something she doesn't want to hear, Sabrina said. Does it work? Sometimes, she said. I let it work more than I should. He looked at her with what she now recognized as his amused expression, which was very small and lived mostly in the corners of his eyes. That's called parenting, he said. I'm still figuring that part out, she said. Most people are, he said. The ones who've got it figured out are usually the ones you should trust least. Spring arrived, the way it arrived in the city, not with any announcement, but with a particular quality of light. One morning that was different from the morning before, a warmth in the air that was not yet reliable but was clearly trying. The trees in the park near Sabrina's building had gone from bare to that tentative early green that looked almost shy, like it wasn't sure yet if it had permission. She had started taking Ava to the park in the mornings before school. Not every morning. Some mornings were too complicated, too early, too full of logistics. But most mornings, when she could manage it, she left her phone in her bag for the first 20 minutes and just walked alongside her daughter and watched her pay attention to things. Ava noticed a lot. She always had. The world that she navigated without sound had compensated her richly in other directions. The angle of light through leaves, the body language of strangers, the specific patterns of pigeons that other people walked through without registering. Sabrina was learning to see some of what Ava saw. She was a student at it. Not a gifted one, but a persistent one. In April, the Whitmore Group launched an initiative that David Ewan had advised against on cost grounds, and that Sabrina had done anyway. It was a funding program for education and communication technology for children with hearing disabilities, not a charity in the arm's length sense, not a line item on a CSR report, but a working partnership with 3 schools in New York and 2 in Philadelphia that funded equipment and specialist staff and, critically, provided a model for how hearing children in the same classrooms could learn basic sign communication to participate with their deaf and hard of hearing classmates. The initiative was called Clear Channel, which was Ava's suggestion. Sabrina had presented her with 3 possible names on a piece of paper, written out in both English and sign, and Ava had pointed immediately to that one with the expression she wore when she found something obvious. The press coverage was positive, but Sabrina did not do it for the press coverage. And on the one occasion where a journalist wrote a piece that was more about her personal transformation than about the program's substance, she called the editor directly and said she would prefer the substance covered, which was an unusual request from a CEO, and the editor found it interesting enough to assign a follow-up piece that focused on the program design. That one she was fine with. The work was not glamorous. It was meetings and logistics and the specific difficulties of working within 3 different school districts with 3 different bureaucracies and 3 different sets of entrenched opinions about how things should be done. Logan's security team ran the vendor verification for the technology suppliers, which was outside the traditional scope of corporate security and which Logan had suggested himself, because his background gave him a specific eye for which vendors were what they said they were. He was right about 2 of them, which saved the program significant money and 1 significant embarrassment. It was the kind of work that took longer than it should and produced results slower than projected and was worth doing. The evening that Sabrina thought about later, the The one that settled in her memory not as a dramatic moment, but as a true one, was in late April, a Saturday, the kind of day that required no particular agenda. They had ended up in the park, all four of them, in the way that things sometimes happened without being planned. Logan had brought Marcus over because the upstairs neighbor was getting new floors and the noise was untenable, and Ava had pulled Sabrina toward the door with the wordless insistence of someone who had already decided the day's direction. And so they had walked the 4 blocks together and found a spot near the path where the light came through the new leaves, in a way that was not precisely warm, but was clearly headed there. Marcus was running something. It was unclear what. He had a stick and a set of rules he had invented, in which he was explaining to an audience of none, in the way of 6-year-olds who did not require participation to proceed. Ava watched him from a bench with the expression that Sabrina now knew meant she was both following the logic and finding it amusing. Logan sat on the bench beside Ava. Not close, not far, the particular distance of someone who was present without pressing. Sabrina sat on his other side. They didn't talk much. She was getting more comfortable with that, with the version of Logan's company that didn't require filling. She had spent most of her adult life in rooms where silence was a negotiating position, a void to be filled before someone else filled it with something unfavorable to you. She was unlearning that. It was slow, and she was imperfect at it. And occasionally she still talked too much or too fast or about something that was not the real subject. And Logan would look at her with an expression that was not impatient, but was patient in the way that made you aware of the patience, and she would stop and recalibrate. He was not easy to know. She wanted to say that clearly, even inside her own understanding of him, because there was a version of this story where a man's grief and his steadiness and his quiet competence added up to something uncomplicated, and that version was not the true one. Logan Pierce had damage in him that he managed rather than resolved. He had nights he didn't talk about, and mornings that were harder than other mornings, and he was not always patient, and he sometimes made decisions with his jaw set in a way that meant he'd already had the argument with himself and wasn't interested in having it again. He loved his son with a fierceness that occasionally made him too protective in ways Marcus navigated with the intuitive flexibility of a child who had grown up inside a particular kind of love and understood its shape. He was not a finished person. Neither was she. They were, she had concluded, people who were still in the middle of becoming whoever they were going to be, which was probably the most honest thing she had thought about herself in years. Ava slid off the bench at some point and went to join Marcus in whatever was happening with the stick, and for a few minutes it was just Logan and Sabrina on the bench in the April light, with 2 children making something up in front of them. The Clear Channel announcement got good coverage this week, Logan said. The Philadelphia piece especially. It did, she said. Dr. Cho says the Riverside School program is already showing results in classroom communication, 3 months in. That's faster than you projected. The teachers there are exceptional, she said. When the people running the thing are genuinely invested, it goes faster. He nodded. You were right about the vendor on the hardware side, she said. Remy, the numbers he gave us on the 3rd quote were cleaner than the first 2. I know, he said. You could say I told you so. I didn't tell you so, he said. I said it was worth a second look. Different thing. She looked at him. He was watching Marcus and Ava, and in that particular angle of late April light, his face was doing what faces did when their guard was down, and there was no professional reason to maintain a specific expression. It was not a soft face. It was a tired face, a face that had been through weather and had not been prettified by it. She knew he had dreams that woke him up. He had mentioned it once, offhandedly, as a fact about himself rather than a problem to be solved, the way he stated facts. She knew that some days the grief for Claire was a low current, and some days it was not. She knew that he called his former commanding officer about once a month in a conversation he had in his car, and that he never talked about what was said, and that he came back from it steadier than before. She did not try to fix any of this. She was trying, in general, to do less fixing and more accompanying, which was harder than fixing and also better. Across the grass, something had shifted in the children's game. Marcus had stopped explaining and was now watching Ava, who had put down the rabbit and was standing with her hands making shapes, her own signs, the private ones, but also some of Dr. Cho's vocabulary and some of Marcus's recently learned 30, building something out of gesture and expression and the quality of her attention that Marcus was tracking with his whole face, reading it the way he'd taught himself to read it, slowly and seriously, and without rushing to an answer before he'd understood the question. Then he nodded, big and emphatic, and made a shape back with his hands. Imperfect, a little wrong in the angle, but clear enough in its intent. Ava looked at his hands. Then she looked at his face. Then she smiled, which was not a thing she did readily or for social performance, which was exactly why it meant what it meant. Logan saw it. Sabrina saw it. Neither of them said anything. After a while, Ava walked back toward the bench. She was unhurried, the way she was when she had somewhere she was going and was confident she would get there. She stopped in front of Logan and looked up at him with an expression that was direct and considered and entirely her own. Then she said, clearly, in the voice that had been finding itself over months of work and trust and the slow accumulation of safety, "Dad." Not a question this time. Not the fractured, wondering syllable of a December hallway floor. A statement. An assignment of something she had decided. Logan looked at her for a moment. His throat moved. "Hey," he said. Same word as December. Same soft, direct delivery. But inside it, something different. Something that had had 4 months to grow into what it was. Something that was not performance or promise, but just the simple acknowledgement of a truth that had already been true for a while. He reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from her face, the gesture of someone who had been doing small, careful things for another person, long enough that it had stopped being deliberate. Ava accepted it. Then she climbed up onto the bench between them and sat, and after a moment she leaned slightly, equally, in both directions at once, against Logan on her left and against her mother on her right, with the unself-conscious ease of someone who had decided where the weight went and was done deliberating about it. Sabrina did not look at Logan. She looked at her daughter's profile. The serious line of her forehead, the small nose, the jaw that she had inherited from somewhere that wasn't Sabrina. Then she looked across the park at Marcus, who was talking to a pigeon now, apparently, with significant conviction. She thought about what it cost, the kind of life she had been living. Not in money, which she had always understood as a unit of exchange rather than a unit of meaning. In the other kind of cost, the slow daily tax on everything that required presence, which she had been paying for years without knowing it was optional. She had thought that the controlled version of herself was the strong version. She had built a company on that belief. She had built most of her adult life on it. She still believed in control. She still believed in the work, the rigor, the specific pleasure of a complex problem brought to a clean resolution. Those things were not wrong in her. They were, in fact, part of what she had to offer the people she was choosing to be close to. The capacity to manage what was difficult, to not flinch when the room got hard. But she was learning, at 30 years old, the thing that some people learned at 20 and some never learned at all, which was that the people who needed you didn't need the managed version. They needed the version underneath it, the version that sat on a bench in April light and did not reach for her phone and did not calculate the next move and just was there, warm and imperfect and present, which was the only thing that could not be delegated or optimized or purchased with any amount of money from any specialist anywhere. Presence. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. Marcus abandoned the pigeon and came running back across the grass with the energy of someone who had just remembered something important. He arrived at the bench slightly out of breath and looked at all three of them with the democratic urgency of a child who did not yet rank audiences. "There's a pretzel cart," he said, "by the fountain. I have $1.40. "That's not enough for a pretzel," Logan said. "I know," Marcus said, "but between us it probably is." Logan looked at Sabrina. Sabrina looked at Logan. "He's not wrong," she said. Logan stood up. He offered Ava a hand and she took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and then Marcus grabbed his other hand without asking, because Marcus did not tend to ask about things he was reasonably certain would be allowed. And they started across the grass toward the fountain, with the four of them in a loose and uncoordinated line that was not elegant and not arranged, and would not have made a good photograph in any conventional sense. It was the realest thing Sabrina had felt in years. The weight of Ava's hand finding hers. The sun on the new leaves. The unresolved quality of the future, which for once she was not trying to manage ahead of, just walking toward, one step at a time on the imperfect grass. She did not know how it would look in a year. She did not know all the ways it would be hard, and she knew it would be hard, because the things worth having were always harder than the things that merely looked like them. She knew that Logan had mornings that cost him. She knew that Ava still had days where the words were somewhere unreachable. She knew that Marcus would eventually reach an age where his confidence began to complicate itself, and that she did not entirely know how to be a parent to a child who was not hers, and that Logan did not entirely know how to be part of a life as large and exposed as hers. None of that was resolved, but they were walking toward the pretzel cart in April, and Ava was holding her hand, and that was a true thing in the present tense, and the present tense was enough to walk inside. The fountain came into view around the path's curve, and the pretzel cart was there, exactly where Marcus had promised it would be. And the vendor was an older man with a paper hat and the patience of someone who had been selling pretzels in this park long enough to have seen everything and be surprised by nothing. He looked at the four of them and said, "What'll it be?" Marcus, who was always ready to answer that question, began explaining.